Chapter 31, July 27th, 2173. 2102 Ilium, Tassal System, Nos Astra, Sayola Restaurant. So, began Detiovi after we ordered desserts. Do you think he will arrive early enough to save what's left of his savings? Perhaps, perhaps not, I answered noncommittally. I put the account information out there, and hundreds of hackers call the extranet their home. It wouldn't surprise me if some of them targeted that account. Detiovi chuckled politely. Yes, that could happen. It would be too bad for Vertorios to stand there with empty hands after he put so much effort into getting there as fast as he could. She took another sip of her wine before she asked, "What do you think will happen to the money? I mean, it's only peanuts compared to the numbers we see every day, but I'm interested in it nonetheless. I think most of it will find its way into the hands of someone who knows what it can accomplish. But what's going to happen to the rest?" I swirled the wine in my glass slowly. The wine was a lighter shade of red than Detiovi's, but I was sure that the taste of my wine was in no way inferior to hers. Most of the money would find its way towards various of my projects and would be treated as donations by someone who would like to stay anonymous. My eyes looked up from the slowly moving liquid to find hers waiting for an answer with expectation. I don't know, I continued, the smile on my face turning playful for a moment. And I don't want to know. Isn't that much more exciting? It definitely is, agreed Detiovi. I like surprises. Well, as long as they don't impact me negatively. But I suppose the shreds that got away are too diminutive to really amount to anything. It's like giving the next best person 100 credits. An apt comparison. After all, if the right person gets their hands on the 100 credits, who knows what's going to happen? He could turn those 100 into 1,000,000, I replied, taking her comparison in a different direction than the one she implied. That's not what I was saying, and you know that, Detiovi said, but there was no sign of annoyance on her face. But your argument holds merit. We never know what a random person could accomplish if you give them a chance. By the way, isn't that your usual modus operandi? Not exactly, I answered. It's more like I'm looking for those with potential. You wouldn't believe how many there are, and the only thing you have to do is to give those people a chance to realize it. Detiovi raised an eyebrow in question. I don't think it is that easy, is it? Of course not, I scoffed. You still have to find those with potential in the first place, and they're not that easy to find. Furthermore, not everyone lives up to their full potential. You always get something in return, but it is not always a jackpot. So it is like playing the lottery. Blanks, jackpots, and consolidation prizes, she concluded. I shrugged. Somewhat, yes. Detiovi smiled politely and said, I didn't take you for such a risk taker. You seem more careful than that to me. I only said it's somewhat like a lottery, I waved away her concern. The trick is to minimize the risk and maximize the profit, just like anything else in our line of work. It's certainly a novel method of advancing your position. Perhaps I'll try it myself in the future. I can only recommend it, I advised and took a sip of my drink. The conversation between us came to a stop and I enjoyed the moment of silence. While the tension that had been there during Vertorios' outburst had disappeared, our table was still the center of attention. It wasn't hard to guess that the other guests of the restaurant were talking about us and how I dealt with Vertorios. The way he ran away from me would make its rounds around and make it harder for him to find any support. Vertorios basically destroyed his own reputation, especially with his public outburst. Nobody liked to work with someone who had shown themselves to not have much self-control in public. Now, Detiovi broke the moment of silence. While I certainly enjoyed the show, and you have proven yourself to be better company than Vertorios in just a few minutes, there is one thing I want to know. Why did you want to talk with me? I'm sure I made it clear that you didn't have anything of interest to me during your induction. That you did, I conceded. But that was then, and now is now. Perhaps I found something of interest to you. Unlikely, said Detiovi, and her tone implied that she really held no expectations. But if you want to change my mind, then go on and try. You have time until the dessert arrives, so don't waste any time. After all, it won't take long until the waiter returns with our orders. Well, if that wasn't a challenge, then I'll give it my best, I responded with a confident smirk. Detiovi waved her hand, giving me permission to begin. Perhaps you already know, but I spent the last few weeks away from Ilium, I began, and saw Daytiovi nod at my question. Some of that time away I spent on the Citadel, a place where your news agencies aren't represented because of reasons, or am I wrong? Her smile dimmed, and her previously relaxed facial expressions froze. I knew I was moving into dangerous territory, but as long as I tread carefully, I should be okay. The only thing I knew for sure was that I now had her undivided attention, for better or worse. Daytiovi had tried for years to expand her media empire to the Citadel, but until now every effort ended in failure. She didn't rise to her position without trampling over others, and if there was one disadvantage to an Asari's lifespan, then it was that one had a lot more time to leave some jealous and petty competitors behind. And Daytiovi left many of them behind her. Perhaps it was one of them, or just those already established on the Citadel, but someone did try their best to keep Daytiovi off the Citadel. One may ask why she wanted to establish herself on the Citadel when her media empire generated millions of credits on Ilium alone. Nothing to say of her branches in the rest of Asari space. The answer was pretty easy. All those credits generated on Ilium were nothing compared with what even one of the minor news companies generated on the Citadel. After all, the Citadel was the central hub of the galaxy. It connected the different territories of the various species in the galaxy with each other. The people living on dozens of colonies, major and minor, could access any random magazine. The potential profit of a single issue could go up into the millions effortlessly. Yet that wasn't the only reason why Daytiovi wanted to open a branch on the Citadel. It was easy to forget with her constant public appearances and media presence. But the bulk of her income came from her communication network, a network that was centered on Ilium and allowed for high-speed access to the extranet and its connected services. All kinds of companies paid good money for such an access, and it was a much more reliable source of income than anything that had to do with the media, which relied on the mood of the public. Yet there was no more room for improvement on Ilium since the Ilium government, corrupt and influenced by the cooperations as it was, limited the number of high-speed lines any company could acquire. Furthermore, the selection process to decide who was allowed to purchase one in the first place was also heavily regulated. In other words, the people who could influence members of the selection committee, the best would be allowed to buy one. To prevent any company from becoming too powerful and influential by having a monopoly on the high-speed lines, the Ilium government officials introduced the limitations. The fact that it allowed them to receive bribes from more than one source was probably a nice incentive as well. For that reason, Daytiovi wanted to open a branch of her company on the Citadel, since the regulations there were a lot more strict than those on Ilium. One of the rules was that anyone trying to acquire one of the high-speed lines belonging to the Citadel had to have a business on the Citadel for at least 2 to 3 years before the Citadel officials even considered allowing someone to take part in the selection process. Furthermore, it wasn't as easy as on Ilium to convince the members of the committee, but I was sure that Daytiovi would handle that part. It wasn't my problem anyway, until she asked me to do so herself. The only thing I wanted to do was to offer my help to get her on the Citadel. After all, I knew the reason why she failed to do so in the last few years. And that way, I would secure a partnership with her, a partnership that would hopefully allow me access to her communication network and preferential treatment when I wanted to rent her high-speed access to the extranet for my company. Besides, I would have one of 2 members of the Circle on my side already when I wanted to access the shared funds of the Circle for a project. You're not wrong, stated Daytiovi, but what could you do? I think I know what you're alluding to, and let me tell you right now, you should choose a different topic. I have it handled. So you have someone on the Appropriations Committee, someone who will ensure that your application to open a branch on the Citadel will get through, I guessed. Daytiovi's smirk said it all. That's right, my application will get through. I made sure of that. This time, nothing will get in my way. That's great. Thank you. As you can see, I have it handled. You should choose something different. I don't think I will, I retorted, and earned an incredulous look from her. You still want to talk about it? She questioned. A scoff followed after I gave her a determined nod. Then try it. If you want to waste your precious time, then be my guest. It should be amusing to see you fail to convince me. Her tone suggested that she was utterly confident in her words, that there was nothing I could say or do that would convince her of the contrary, and that I would only make a fool out of myself by trying. If I had been a lesser person and didn't know what I knew, then I would have been convinced by her words to stop and try a different angle. Fortunately, I knew something she didn't, and my words would rattle her enough to consider my offer instead of rejecting it out of principle. The Asari you bribed, Luana Mellor, got a better offer from Say Elite Networks and will reject your application to open a branch office within the month. Your plan to go through the Department of Economics will fall through before it even got off the ground, I revealed. And I could see a brief flicker of anger in Detiovi's eyes before it cooled down to a calculating interest. I see that the rumors about your information network are accurate. You seem to have a talent for finding and uncovering information others would like to keep hidden. Yet I don't care one bit about Luana Mellor, she replied, and there was nothing to suggest that she anything other than truthful. I already expected that someone would pay her more and that she would take it. After all, it's safer to take a bribe for doing nothing rather than the other way around. Other than some credits, there's nothing that could lead back to you. I would do the same in her position, and thus I prepared for this situation. I knew about her backup plan, and I was also aware of something else about it. Do you mean the Solarian in the Department for Immigration? I think his name was Kilos, right? The wine glass stopped on its way toward Detiovi's lips, and for the first time during our conversation, I could see genuine surprise coupled with concern on her face. She put her glass back on the table, and her hand gripped it so tightly that I suspected that if she increased the pressure even a little bit more, the glass would shatter in her hands. I was sure I erased anything that could connect me to him. So, how did you find out? Does it really matter how I found out? The only thing that's important is that I wasn't the only one. I evaded. What happened? She asked. Well, more like demanded. It's not official yet, but Kilos will be fired and tried for taking bribes. As far as I know, CSEC got a tip from someone working for Say Elite Networks, I told her, lowering my voice conspiratorial. And with those few words, I ensured that Detiovi wouldn't look any further than Say Elite Networks for anyone else involved in uncovering her deal with the Solarian Kilos. I gave her a convenient target for her ire, a culprit for her setback. She wouldn't look deeper into the matter after confirming Say Elite Network's involvement in the case, and thanks to that, my own involvement would never be discovered by her. Someone in the upper management had a grudge against Detiovi and did their best to keep her off the Citadel, so it wouldn't be unusual for them to be doing this. Yet they only knew about Luana Mellor initially and paid her off to forget her deal with Detiovi. The thing with Kilos would have completely flown below their radar if I hadn't made sure that they received information about it. Say Elite Network fell for a simple smokescreen, and that didn't say many good things about them. Sure, Detiovi did her best to make it look like bribing Mellor was her only plan, but she made a mistake while covering her tracks. While using Mellor was her preferred option, Detiovi already knew that she would probably amount to nothing more than a distraction and thus left a trace, connecting them to each other. Most would think they got lucky by discovering this trace, but anyone with experience in covering and uncovering those traces would know it was intentional. Those people would look further into the matter, and if they were good enough at their job, like my people, they would find the Solarian. I sent the information to Say Elite Network via multiple proxies, and they reacted just like I predicted. Well, not exactly like I predicted. I thought they would bribe Kilos too, and not sell him out to CSEC. But hey, it still works out this way. Detiovi's plans were in shambles, and now I had the opportunity to play the knight in shining armor and get her what she wanted. And I would get her to owe me a favor that would hopefully lead to us forming a partnership for the foreseeable future. So what if this partnership was built on me manipulating events that led to this situation? As long as it was profitable for me, I didn't care. I didn't have any plans to deal with her longer than necessary anyway. Suddenly, the glass in Detiovi's hand shattered, and the remaining wine sprayed over the table. Thankfully, it didn't hit her dress, or else she would have stopped our conversation here and then. Her hand was surrounded by a blue haze, indicating her subconscious use of her biotics. The fact that she lost control of them was a clear hint of how angry she was. Otherwise, a person as controlled as Detiovi would have never used her biotics. I wasn't worried that she would use her biotics on me and throw me through the restaurant if I rattled her anymore. She was too experienced to let her mood influence her that much. It was only the circumstance that others denied her place on Citadel once again that got her so upset, and I knew that she would get control of herself back shortly. Just as the thought crossed my mind, the haze around her hand disappeared, and she let out a fake laugh. "Ah, look at that," she said somewhat louder for the people who looked over after they heard a glass shatter. The glass slipped from my hands. "Perhaps I'm more tired than I thought. Maybe I should go to bed early today." "Don't worry," I replied in the same volume. "The cake we ordered for dessert will wake you up again. And if not, well, I think every day should end on a high note, don't you?" I looked her in the eyes and tried to tell her that I already had a solution for her problem lined up. One she would learn about if she stayed. From the slight widening of her eyes, I guessed that she understood my intention. And if I understood the following narrowing of the same, then I just got a promise of pain if I didn't deliver. Fortunately, I would be able to deliver. "You're right," she sighed. "We've already ordered, and it would be a waste to leave before tasting it." With a quick glance, I saw that the other guests had returned to their own conversations and didn't pay our table any more attention than before. "Before anything else, I want to know how Sheryl found Chilos." The look in her eyes brokered no objection. "Tell me everything you know." And I did, technically. I told her exactly how my own analysts found out about Chilos and how they guessed that Malur was just a smokescreen. Everything they found out was laid bare. Only a single fact was left out. Namely, that I was the one that leaked the information to Sheryl Network and that they never found out about it on their own. Everything else was the truth, because why should I lie? Nothing of what I said would tell her that I was the leak. The best one could do in my situation was to be truthful so that she didn't have any reason to dig deeper than to confirm that I did what I said. Of course, I left out some minor details that weren't important to the whole, but gave her something to find when she tried to confirm my story. This way, she would be more inclined to believe it. Andrew told me this trick: never tell the whole story in one go, but leave out some minor details that are only good for getting a bigger picture. That way, suspicious people would find something and then think that they now knew everything. In the meantime, our dessert arrived after another waiter came to clean up the spilled wine and bring Daytiovi another glass. Yet, despite her previous statement, she didn't stop me from continuing to talk, eagerly interested in what I was saying. More than once, a slight grimace appeared on her face when I told her about how my analysts found the connection between her and Chilos. "And that's everything, I guess," I ended before taking another bite of my dessert. "Interesting," commented Daytiovi. "It seems like I underestimated the information-gathering ability of Sheryl. You shouldn't feel down too much about it. The companies and people on the Citadel have a lot of experience with such things. It's the center of interspecies politics, and politics make it necessary to be informed about almost everything. If you want your company to become more than a third-rate business, then you have to know how to play the game." "Mm-hmm," she hummed. "What does that say about you then? Your company became first-rate in a startlingly short amount of time. If I remember correctly, it took you around a year to achieve a place in the top 100 after you took control of your Citadel office directly. It just means I prepared accordingly during my time as the Minister of Economics for the Alliance. Knowing the right people, making connections, and learning about what I could and couldn't do. It's all about preparation," I mused before a small chuckle escaped me. "Besides, I am a human, and our species is still new to the galactic stage. Nobody knew what I would do and what I was willing to do, so there were not many who knew how to counter my moves. And I was a novel curiosity to others. For them, it was like watching an entirely new theater play. Sadly, I was the one who was writing the play, and they took too long to understand my writing style to anticipate what would happen in the next act." Daytiovi rolled her eyes at my dramatic comparison, but was amused nonetheless. A moment later, the expression on her face changed from amused to serious once again, and she fixed me with a calculating look. "As amusing as your descriptions are, we're already eating our dessert, and while I was willing to let you continue, you still haven't said anything about your offer." "I thought it was obvious," I asked. "It's getting you on the Citadel. Despite my recent setback, I'm not stupid. I already inferred that much. My question is how?" I hummed, taking my time to answer her question. Raising my own glass to take a sip, I began. As I already mentioned, I used my time as Minister of Economics to forge some connections on the Citadel. One of them is the current head of the Department of Economics of the Citadel, Val Dosk. I met him during the first years of the Alliance's exposure to the greater galaxy, and we stayed in contact. Dropping Dosk's name got me Daytiovi's undivided attention. She probably already knew what I was going to say, but that didn't stop her from wanting to hear me say it out loud. After all, nothing was better than to have your assumption confirmed. We did each other favors over time, and even after I retired from my official position in the Alliance, and he ascended to the position of department head, we continued our mutually beneficial relationship. And let's just say that it's my turn to request a favor from him. There was hope in Daytiovi's eyes, a hope eclipsed only by the blatant greed in them. She wanted me to use that favor for her, and that badly at that. Of course, that was my plan in the first place. Sabotage her plans to make Daytiovi look for alternatives, and then dangle a surefire way to get what she wanted in front of her. How could she say no to that? And that was precisely what I wanted. All that was needed was just another little push. And I'm sure that an application to open up a branch on the Citadel is a small matter if the department head himself endorses it. It would probably be much faster than going through the normal bureaucratic chain. The twitching of her lips told me that Daytiovi was trying her best to stop her smile from turning into a predatory grin. "And what can I do to convince you to use that favor for me?" she purred. Damn, she wanted that favor desperately. "I'm sure we can find something that would convince me to do so, Miss Daytiovi," I answered. "I would prefer it if you called me Mirala. After all, we will work closely together from now," she responded with a flirtatious smile. "Only if you call me Oscar, Mirala." I had her. The only remaining question was how many concessions I would get out of her. Chapter 32, June 7th, 2173, 1523, Citadel Widow System, Human Embassy, Ambassador Goyle's office. There has to be something going wrong if there's a message waiting for me to come here when I'm not even on the Citadel for 3 days yet, I said as I sat down in one of the comfortable chairs in front of Anita's desk. Anita gave me an annoyed look, and I didn't know if it was because of my casual greeting or that I sat down without waiting for her permission, as it would be proper. Her time as the human ambassador on the Citadel made Anita a stickler for protocol, and I couldn't help but do my best not to follow them if it was just the two of us. "Please stay serious, Oscar. Right now, I don't have the patience to deal with your antics." She gave me another look that spoke of deep-seated tiredness, and I decided to stop agitating her. Usually, Anita welcomed it after some time when I ignored protocol and helped her unwind. Her job was stressful enough without me adding to it. I leaned forward, bracing my arms on my knees and crossing my fingers in front of my face. "You look more stressed than usual," I noted. "What's going on? And is it something I can help you with?" "You know that you only have to ask." A small smile hushed over Anita's face, and she shook her head negatively. "Thank you for the offer, but it's not something you could help with. The Council tries to convince the Alliance Parliament to accept some more regulations, all in the name of further cooperation and to better integrate the Alliance into the established system. Of course, they're also dangling the carrot of technological advancements in their faces, and the Parliament is willing to accept. Idiots, all of them." "What kind of advancement?" I asked, interested in what the Council was promising. "That's the real kicker," spat Anita. "It's not really clear what they're willing to give to us. The deal is about the data the Solarians pulled from 3 damaged Prothean beacons, all the data they could save and decrypt, and apparently it will revolutionize our use of EZO. At least that's what they're saying. Who knows if it's really everything they pulled from those beacons, or if they're going to conveniently forget to transfer something that's actually useful for us. The Parliament is really thinking of agreeing to this, I wondered. Why should they? It's just a matter of time until we're on their level. So why would they exchange a short period of time of inferiority for a lifetime of being under their thumbs? "That's the same argument I put forward," complained Anita, throwing her hands in the air. But the moment the words decrypted Prothean data got thrown into the room, They were all for it. Most Parliament members were there when humanity found the Prothean beacon on Mars, and remember the technological leap shortly after. She turned towards the window overlooking the Presidium, her arms crossed in front of her. They have forgotten that we didn't pull that much data from it in the first place, and everything that came after was based on human ingenuity. You don't have to tell me that, I said calmly. I was there, but I can understand their point too. I stood up, slowly walking toward her side while continuing to talk. To them, the Protheans are these wise, powerful predecessors, the beings that built the Citadel, the mass relays, and who knows what else. They don't know what we know. And for the time being, that's all right. How's that all right? Anita asked, frustration evident in her voice. For the sake of quick and easy technological advancement, they're willing to put us under the thumbs of the Council. It won't end just with this. Once the Council got their way one time, what's going to stop them from doing it again, and again, and again? Before we know it, we're going to be a client state like the Volus. It starts with small things, but before we know it, we sold our freedom. If it comes to that, the solution is quite easy, I said, standing next to her, my eyes looking over the Presidium. And what's your oh-so-brilliant solution? We take it back. I didn't want to sound too presumptuous, but I thought my line was epic. At first, it seemed like Anita thought the same, with her wide eyes and slightly open mouth, but my assumption was quickly dashed when she started to giggle. We take it back. Couldn't you find something that isn't so corny? I rolled my eyes and answered, I thought it fit. You go on and on about us losing our freedom, and I say we take it back. It might have been corny, but at least it got you out of your mood. She shook her head, and I could see that a small smile had replaced the frown on her face. That it did, she admitted. What regulations is the Council even trying to push on to us, I asked. Essentially, they want a front-row seat whenever we find Prothean ruins and control our progress of decrypting the data we find. Of course, they call it something like ensuring the correct handling of invaluable relics through the presence of highly trained experts. Does this new regulation apply to newly found Prothean sites or all? All, Anita responded. This means if we want to dig deeper into the Mars archives, we will need a Council-approved expert. The work there was already slow with all the newly discovered sites and the other discoveries. She grumbled, alluding to ruins of the even older spacefaring species the Alliance found. If they even send one anyway. Ah, you think they're going to intentionally slow down our progress in learning from the Prothean beacons and other artifacts, to keep us from growing too fast and upsetting their balance, or better yet, to make us dependent on them. That thought crossed my mind, Inedi, admitted Anita. Then you shouldn't worry so much, I said confidently, and she looked at me with one delicate eyebrow raised. Her question was written clearly on her face, and I was more than willing to answer it. First of all, the regulations are only for Prothean sites, and I like to think that our own resourcefulness and creativity are more than enough to bridge the gap. I carefully stressed the word Prothean, but never said out loud that the ruins and technology of other species were not included in these new regulations. And even in the case of the Council finding out, legally, we would have done nothing wrong. Yet saying this out loud would have been dangerous. We may have been in the office of the human ambassador, and the security here was immense, but I didn't discount the fact the Citadel had been the playground of the STG for centuries. The possibility of them being interested in our conversation right now was quite high, and even if the window was a one-way mirror, I wouldn't put it past them to somehow read my lips through it. Paranoid, I know, but better safe than sorry, as long as our position wasn't as secure as we would like. I sighed and shook my head. Thinking about a problem you knew you couldn't change was a waste of time. Is there anything else I should know? I asked, steering the conversation away from our previous topic. The Batarians, started Anita, and stopped for a moment. If I didn't know her any better, I would think she was considering which words would be polite, but I knew she was considering if she would be polite in the first place or cuss up a storm about them. She went with something in between. The Batarians are getting bolder with each passing month. Their recent success in proving, Anita put air quotes around the word, their innocence in the pirate raids against our colonies made things worse. The newest Batarian ambassador is some noble high up in the hierarchy of the hegemony. He struts around the Presidium and the council chambers as if he owns them. As far as I know, he got the position through some of his connections and treats it like a vacation. Thankfully, he's an idiot that can't see that he isn't making any friends with his attitude. Even the other Batarians employed by their embassy try to limit their interactions with him as much as possible. They send such a moron over, I asked, not quite believing their stupidity. My opinion of Batarians wasn't the best, and I recognized that I was biased against them, but I would have never expected them to do something so stupid. Yes, perhaps it's arrogance, thinking that they can get away with it, but the Batarian hegemony is slowly losing political influence. Even Councillor Tivos is losing her patience with the Batarian ambassador, and that woman has the patience of a stone. And the Turian councillor, Brachus, got into a shouting match the last time they met. But that's not something out of the ordinary for Brachus. He's very temperamental for a Turian. Anita scratched her neck with her right index finger, drawing little circles with it. It was one of her habits that came to the forefront whenever she was thinking about something deeply. The only reason why the Batarians aren't losing their political influence faster is that the assistant ambassador, Tak Klama, is a by far more reasonable person. He works around their ambassador and does it well. Even the council prefers to invite Klama if they have to deal with the Batarians and only call on their ambassador if they have no other choice, or it would be a grievous insult to do otherwise. Is he a problem? I asked. You sound like Andrew, said Anita, amused. He asked the same thing and offered to remove the obstacle if necessary. And is it necessary? Not at this moment, no. When I have to deal with the Batarian hegemony, I would rather do so with someone who is competent and doesn't make threats or yells around every other second. A sigh escaped Anita. Furthermore, political assassination isn't done here on the Citadel. It is one of the unwritten rules that everyone abides by. Even a place as cutthroat as the political scene needs some rules. Everything else is permitted, but not murder. The slight smile on Anita's face turned predatory. Besides, I can work around him easily enough. If I have to deal with just the hegemony, I work with Klama, but if it involves another party or is something that involves the council, then I invite their ambassador. His temper is enough to damage their reputation and shines a better light on us as the reasonable party at the same time. Well, if that were the case, I would leave it in Anita's hands. She seemed to have the situation in control. And if I involved myself without her direct permission, anything I did could make her job more difficult. One had to trust others to do their job well, or else one would be stuck micromanaging everything. And that was not something I personally had the inclination or patience for. Anita had much more experience with dealing with Citadel politics, and the best I could do was listen to her advice, especially if I wanted to succeed her in a few years. But there was one thing that stood out to me, and I had to ask her about it. You know, you always call him the Batarian ambassador, I commented lightly, but what's his name? I was actually curious. Anita hadn't mentioned his name once, and I didn't think I heard it somewhere else too. Anita turned to me with a confused look, as if to say that she already mentioned it, and opened her mouth to say it again. Yet instead of chiding me for my inattention, she closed and opened her mouth a few times, not knowing what to say before a look of disbelief flashed over her face, and the tips of her ears turned red. I can't believe it, she whispered, more to herself than to me. I don't know his name. I don't know the Batarian ambassador's name. What was that? I asked with a shit-eating grin. I don't know his name, okay, she responded harshly. I know where he spends his free time and his favorite restaurants, and I even know the name of his preferred consort. But for the love of God, I can't remember his name. I could barely hold back a snigger at how worked up she was because of this. That's not like you. Normally, you're pretty good with names, and it's not like you to forget something like this. I know, she groused, but somehow I can't remember it. It never was that important to me. I've always addressed the Batarian ambassador by his title, and that was enough. Her eyes widened a little as if she only realized something important now. And I believe I'm not the only one. Not the only one? I asked, looking for clarification. Do you mean you're not the only one that doesn't know his name? I believe so, she agreed. During every meeting he attended, He was always addressed as Ambassador, and nothing else. Not even the council has called him by name even once. This time I couldn't hold back my snigger completely. Shows how high the Batarian ambassador is held in regard. Even Anita couldn't hold back a quiet giggle anymore. The light atmosphere continued for a bit before my smile dimmed, and I asked, "But in all seriousness, is there anything else I should know?" "The pirate raids on our borders are steadily increasing in frequency," said Anita, her own smile vanishing from her face. "It's only a matter of time until they get bold enough and try to hit a major colony. A few months, perhaps a year. We're sending more and more troops to the border, but the pirates are slipping through our cordon anyway. They seem to know our border patrol routes." "Any idea how that can be?" I asked concernedly. "If the pirates could slip through our ranks undetected whenever they wanted, it would become a problem of unknown proportions. It wouldn't just be the actual security risks. The feeling of being constantly in danger would deter any further colonization efforts close to the border, since everyone would be too afraid to get close to it. Furthermore, the damage to the alliance and the current governing party's reputation would be immense. Nobody liked a government that failed to protect them, and the people would lose faith in it faster than a Krogan could fall into a blood rage. Andrew has some theories and has his people looking into the matter." "Let me guess," I said. "He's suspecting that someone is selling them information about the patrol routes." "That's our working theory," Anita agreed. "There's not much to support it, but the possibility alone is daunting. We don't know if it's one of our people, a Batarian spy, or if some opportunist of another species is behind it. The AIS is looking into all these possibilities, and we can only hope they find the leak. And fast." While Anita listed the different possibilities, my only thought was that it hopefully wasn't the first option. If it came to light that a traitor in our ranks was responsible for the loss of life and the destruction of property amounting to millions, then it would crush the spirits throughout Alliance territory. The only bright spot was that the pirates and slavers hadn't managed to take any humans as slaves until now. The Alliance military stopping them before they could get away with them. Yet that could change in the blink of an eye. Just the thought that there was some kind of scumbag out there who embraced the possibility that some of his fellow humans would be taken as slaves for his own monetary gain made me sick. The Batarians weren't exactly nice to slaves of different species, as some escapees reported. Not that those reports changed anything. The council was too preoccupied with preserving the status quo to push for real change. Well, with the worsening relationship between the council and the Batarian hegemony, it could be only a matter of time until the council decided to set some new rules in that regard, even before the hegemony withdraws from the Citadel. Still, that wasn't something I could influence better than Anita, so I would just let her do her job. She had a better overview of where to push to effect change. If Andrew has taken on the job of searching for the leak, then it will be found, I assured. Of course he will, else he would have been ousted from his job long ago. If he doesn't find such a huge security risk, there will be a long line of people wishing to take the job from him. In fact, there is already a long line wishing to do so. "There are?" I asked dubiously. My question wasn't out to ask if there were people willing to do his job. His position was high up in the Alliance hierarchy and came with a lot of power and influence in the day-to-day business of the Alliance. So, of course, people were lining up to take the job. The real question was why Andrew hadn't gotten rid of them. "He finds it amusing," answered Anita, who understood what I was asking. "For him, it's like a relaxing hobby to make them run around like headless chickens while they try to cover their bases. As far as I know, Andrew ends up hiring those that can do it well enough. Besides, he told me that if he can't keep them away from his position, the one who ousts him deserves the job." "That sounds like Andrew," I nodded. I could see that there was something that Anita wanted to tell me. She was obviously looking for an opportunity to direct the conversation toward the topic she wanted to talk about, but couldn't find the right moment. As the good friend I was, I decided to just ask her. "So spit it out," I said, and perhaps the words sounded a bit harsher than I intended if I interpreted her startled look correctly. "There's something you want to ask and don't know how," I continued, taking care that my words came out lighter than before. "You know me, there's nothing you can't ask. In the worst case, I say not, and that's it." "You're right," sighed Anita. "The point is, what I want to talk about is quite sensitive. It could get the Alliance in a lot of trouble if it got out that we are even marginally interested in that topic. And I wouldn't get into trouble? As long as you follow the correct procedures, there shouldn't be. How far along are you with getting a research permit for AI? Oh, AI research. That was definitely a topic the Alliance should distance itself from, at least officially. I didn't concentrate on that in the last few years. Dozens of other things kept popping up. But I still got people trying to make inroads in that direction. If I put a bit of pressure at the right points, I should be able to get a research permit in the next 6 months to a year. Most would think that AI research was completely prohibited by the Council, especially after the fiasco with the Geth and Quarians. Yet all of the dominant species in the galaxy continued to look into the topic, the Solarians ahead of everyone. I think only the Asari banned research and development of AI unconditionally inside their territory, and they tried to push for a ban in the whole galaxy every few years, something that always failed due to the Solarians' veto. Quite surprising since the Solarians and Asari were in agreement about most topics. Still, I could understand the position of the Solarians. They neither had the sheer military manpower of the Turians, nor the biotic prowess of the Asari. Their intelligence and technology were their equalizers. In the utility of a functioning AI, one that didn't plan your extermination, wasn't something to be underestimated. Still, the research into AI experienced a setback after the Geth incident, when the panic about any aspect of it reached new heights, and several labs got destroyed by terrified people. Centuries of research were destroyed. Conspiracy theorists claim until today that these attacks were initiated by the Asari. Personally, I thought that there was some substance behind the rumors, and the fact that the Asari insisted on sharper restrictions for any AI research did point in that direction. Furthermore, every council member could decide to send a Spectre to inspect the research facilities at any time they wanted without any prior warning, something which Councillor Tevos did regularly. Interestingly, Tevos always sent 2 Spectres, one Asari and a Spectre not of the species that owned the to-be-inspected facility. Apparently, there was some scandal a few decades back when an Asari Spectre added not-existing security flaws to her report that led to the shutdown of a research facility. The addition of a non-Asari Spectre was ruled as the logical consequence, but didn't stop the fact that Asari Spectres were looking for any excuse to shut down AI research facilities. Over time, further regulations were put in place. For example, the facility had to be visited once before they started any work in them, and all flaws found had to be fixed before the next visit. Facilities could only be shut down when security risks were found on 3 different inspections after the first visit. Should any mistake found not be fixed by the next inspection, the facility can be shut down immediately. There were many more regulations and exceptions for special situations that I thought that the topic had to come up regularly in discussions between council members. Funnily enough, it was way easier to get a research permission as a private individual than as a government agency. Any government had to spring through so many hoops to open a single research facility that it wasn't funny anymore. Furthermore, any member species of the Citadel had to have an embassy for at least 25 years before they were even allowed to file a motion. Yet the previously mentioned restriction didn't apply to individuals of said species. In short, I could legally apply for a research permit while the Alliance couldn't. The only stipulation was that I had to prove that no money or resources I used for the facility or research came from the Alliance. In short, I had to pay for everything out of my own pocket. Nothing too daunting for me since my pockets were rather deep. So, all in all, getting a permit and keeping it was just a matter of stubbornness to go through the bureaucracy and having enough money so that its cogs ran smoothly. Good, nodded Anita, bringing me back from my thoughts. You haven't told me a reason until now, I reminded her. You remember Major Ryder? She asked, and I nodded in response. Yes, Major Alec Ryder, N7 if I remember correctly. Wasn't he part of our escort when he first stepped foot on the Citadel? Correct. Major Ryder came to me a week ago with a project that he thought could give the Alliance the needed edge in regards to our position in the galaxy. And let me guess, I interrupted her, it had something to do with AI. Anita shot me a pained smile. Not hard to guess, right? I got a good picture of what he planned, and it looked like it would help us immensely. But you know, the Alliance can't be seen involving itself with AI research at this point, I finished for her. Not at this time, no. We have neither the required years for a permit nor the political clout. The Alliance is the new kid on the block, so to speak, and our rise is still looked at with suspicion and doubt by the other species in the galaxy. Lust for power is just one of the things they say about us behind our backs. And should we involve ourselves with AI research, we will lose a lot of goodwill I managed to achieve during my years on the Citadel. And my reputation won't suffer, or the Alliance's. You know, since I'm a human too, I asked, raising an eyebrow in doubt. I thought about that too, don't worry. There will not be any problems. You may be an Alliance contractor, but you're still an individual. There are no laws prohibiting you from obtaining a permit, even if the Alliance isn't allowed to yet. I don't know why that's so, but I think it's because this situation never happened before. Most Citadel members either were part of it for more than 25 years or weren't that interested in AI research after the new regulations came about. I had our embassy lawyers check the laws and regulations for the past week over and over, so it's perfectly legal. Of course, that will change after you obtain a permit, but the council can't do anything retroactively. They will probably put you under harsh scrutiny, and if they find any reason to close your facility, you will be banned from AI research throughout life. But I have faith in you. She smirked at me and added, and nobody will think it unusual that you're obtaining one. Your diverse portfolio is thankfully helpful in that regard. Starships, weapons, armor, construction, mining, and don't you even own an ice cream factory? I leveled an unimpressed stare at her. Yeah, laugh it up. It isn't like I haven't been made fun of for that by you and others at least once a year. What can I say? I like the ice cream they produced, and the company was about to go bankrupt. Thousands would have lost their jobs, and saving those had been my good deed of the year. It gave me good PR. My name wasn't exclusively tied with tools of war and destruction anymore, and since then, the company recovered and brought in a small plus. So what do you say? Can I arrange a meeting between you and Major Ryder? Anita asked, looking slightly nervous. I could understand her apprehension. Should I say no, then she had to tell Ryder that there was nothing she could do. Over the years, I had forgotten many of the smaller details of the Mass Effect games, but I remembered that Ryder left the Alliance when they weren't willing to fund his research. It had something to do with his wife, but what exactly? Well, it didn't matter right now. I would probably find out soon enough. The thing that mattered right now was that Ryder was an asset the Alliance couldn't lose, and I was probably their last option to keep Ryder tied, even just loosely, to the Alliance. 3 days from now, I said, and Anita's shoulders dropped slightly in relief. Ad Astra headquarters, Citadel branch. If he needs more time to get to the Citadel, the appointment can be pushed back a few days. That won't be necessary. Ryder is still on the Citadel with his family, assured Anita. She laid her hand on the side of my arm and squeezed slightly. Thanks for that, Oscar. That helps me a lot. I smiled at her and said, I believe I said I would help you if you needed me, didn't I? Besides, Major Alec Ryder wasn't someone I was willing to let go of. He developed the AI Sam, and something like that could become a game changer in our fight against the Reapers, and perhaps further beyond. October 3rd, 2173, Zurier 643, Ilium. Tassali system, Porto de Cola. The sunlight coming in through the window hit my eyes, and I slowly returned to the waking world. Not that that was a good thing. I would have preferred to sleep a bit more, but I contented myself with staying in bed for a few more minutes. It was just so damn comfortable. Yet even that had to end. I sat up, and the soft blanket smoothly slid down my naked torso. While turning sideways to get my legs out of the bed, I stretched my arms upwards to work out the kinks in my back. A satisfying pop came from my left shoulder, and I slowly pulled my arms back down, resting them on my knees. It was still early, but the sunlight was already flooding the bedroom, and my eyes had a hard time adjusting to the brightness. I had never been a morning person, but with every passing year it got worse. Probably one of the symptoms of getting old. A soft murmur came from behind me, combined with the rustling of the blanket. A few moments later, a soft hand touched my back, and I closed my eyes, enjoying the warmth it provided. "Already up?" asked a feminine voice tinged with the tiredness of a barely woken person. "Yeah," I responded, My own voice not much better. I'll have a flight to catch. It's your ship. Couldn't you just tell them to wait? We could spend some more time in bed, she said, trying to sound alluring, which was offset by the yawn that followed shortly. I looked over my shoulder, putting a warm smile in place while the hand on my back disappeared. While that sounds lovely, I can't. I dislike having to adjust my timetable, and if we stay in bed, I'll probably have to adjust several days' worth of meetings. And you know Cicero, he would nag about the delay for months. My eyes wandered over the naked form of one Mirala Dediovi. Her hands were flat on the bed behind her back, pushing her upper body up, and I had the feeling she was pushing her chest slightly more in my direction than was necessary for her position. The blanket pooled around her legs, and through the light red fabric, I could appreciate the contours of her hips. When my eyes returned to her face, the first thing I saw was a small smirk. She had noticed my wandering eyes, and if I learned anything about her in the last months, then it was that she was proud of her body and loved it when someone appreciated it with due respect. Well then, she said with a fake sigh, get going. Perhaps I'll spend the rest of the morning in bed, enjoying it by myself. To accent her words, she used one of her hands to slowly trace the side of her body, disappearing beneath the covers and finding its way to the inside of her thighs. With an act of immense willpower that I refused to show outwardly because that woman knew what she was doing and would jump on any perceived weakness, I tore myself away from the sight. You do that, I chuckled and stood up. If my chuckle came out a bit weakly, then it definitely had nothing to do with the fact that Detov had almost convinced me to stay in bed and damn the consequences. I collected my clothes from where they were carelessly scattered on the floor and put them on. A quick check of the time told me that my shuttle would be here any minute, and I walked towards the bedroom door. I'll see you when you get back, she asked as I made my way through the room. I stopped at the door, turned to her with a smile and answered, Of course, yours will be the first address I'll visit that night. The sentence, looking forward to it, followed me after I left the room. I kept a smile on my face as I made my way through Detiovi's house to get to her personal landing spot. The house was one of her more private properties, away from the eyes of the public, and thus perfect for our little affair. The shuttle was already waiting for me with an open side door when I arrived at the landing spot, and I didn't waste any time entering it. The door shut behind me just as I was falling into my seat, and my driver accelerated the moment my ass was firmly planted in it. The smile I had kept on my face during my way through Detiovi's house disappeared almost immediately. If someone looked at my relationship with Detiovi, they would see a secret affair between two public and prominent persons, perhaps even something with real feelings. Nothing could be further from the truth. We liked each other well enough after working together those last few months, but there were no feelings between us that would lead to any serious relationship. Or perhaps a better description was that we liked each other enough to work together. Both of us were trying to gain the upper hand in our partnership, and that wouldn't end for a long time. And the reason why we have sex? Well, it's claimed that Oscar Wilde once said, everything is about sex except sex. Sex is about power. Or did Sigmund Freud say it? The only thing that mattered was that the quote was correct. Detiovi and I tried to gain power over each other by trying to create some feelings in each other, feelings that could be exploited. Was it morally wrong? Yes, definitely. Did any of us care? Definitely not. We both knew what the other was trying to do, but we kept the charade up because it was amusing. And the sex was great, not gonna lie. I had several lovers over the years, but just like with Detiovi, I kept my dalliances out of the public eye. But enough about her. My thoughts would turn to her again after I finished my business with Cicero, and I was on the way back to Ilium. I already got several concessions out of her after I managed to get her a permit to open up a branch on the Citadel. She was noticeably distracted by the endeavor to get her operations to run smoothly, so I had an easier time taking advantage of her resources without her knowledge. For now, I had to concentrate on what was before me. Cicero was a stickler for punctuality and order. Like most Turians, I had the pleasure to get acquainted with more closely. Should I not meet the deadlines he set, then I could kiss my hope goodbye, that I hopefully could convince him to introduce me to his contacts in the Turian military. And it was those contacts that were the foundation of Cicero's influence and power. In terms of financial power, Nisko, Ron, and I were the powerhouses of the Circle of Alamina, and I didn't know which of us would come out as the winner if we ever compared our total assets. Cicerio was a small fish compared to us, and he wasn't exactly poor either. Having enough money to buy the number of weapons the Turian military wanted to get rid of told me that his account had enough zeros to buy a small planet, or at least a moon. Yet his contacts were by far more valuable than any credits he had. Just being able to arrange this deal meant that his contacts in the Turian hierarchy had enough influence to make this deal possible. Furthermore, his contacts weren't just restricted to the Turian military. Cicerio knew people all around the galaxy and from all walks of life. Be they from the different militaries of the galaxy, its numerous mercenary groups, or people deep in the underbelly of galactic society. One had only to ask and pay the right price, and Cicerio would be able to get it. He could probably get hold of an old atomic bomb of Turian design. No matter how much the Turians, along with the Asari and Solarians, may decry the use of atomic bombs as barbaric, before they made contact with the Citadel, or perhaps before their unification war, the Turians had used nuclear bombs in their wars, probably even more than humanity. The only difference between them and us was that the Turians hadn't used one on their one homeworld, as far as the public knows. Just a few of their colonies. The fact that their unique physiology made them more resistant to the typical fallout of nuclear explosions likely decreased their reluctance to use them too. Fun fact, of the big three, Asari, Solarian, Turian, only the Asari didn't develop a Fisher bomb or any of its diversions. The Solarians created one, but there had never been a situation where they had to use one before it became obsolete. And the Asari? They developed something just as deadly, only without the fallout. It wasn't a hard mental leap that the other galactic civilizations followed the Asari's example and created weapons of mass destruction that were just as deadly or even more so, but without the pesky side effect of radioactive contamination. And wasn't that interesting? The so-called greatest civilization of the galaxy didn't deprecate the creation of weapons that could erase the lives of thousands or even millions in an instant. But something that denied the user his spoils, for example, the immediate use of the area where an atomic bomb was fired, was called barbaric. It was hypocrisy at its finest, and it was so human that I knew we would have done, and will do it too. I couldn't help but chuckle quietly when I noticed how far my thoughts drifted away from the topic I had first thought of. History had always been one of my favorite subjects back in school, and the pasts of the other galactic civilizations were incredibly fascinating. And the more I delved into their histories, the more I was convinced that weren't so different as some believed. Of course, there were some differences that couldn't be ignored, like the fact that the Asari were a monogendered species. But if one closed their eyes and pretended that physiological distinctions didn't exist, it was easy to imagine that we were all one species. Our cultures, our ways of life, different because of the conditions of our environments we had to adapt to, and not because we are different species. Nobody would say that the ancient Greeks and the Maya were two different species because they differed in how they went about their lives. At least, that was how I decided to see the world. It helped me to understand the inhabitants of the galaxy a bit more, and it would help me in the future when I would have to deal with their representatives in the name of the Alliance. A jerk of the shuttle brought me back to the present, and the pilot's voice came through the intercom. We left Ilium's atmosphere just now. It should only take a few more minutes until we arrive at the Sagittarius, sir. Wonderful, I replied, keeping the comm channel open. Please tell me when we're only a minute out. Of course, sir. I'll tell you immediately. A quiet click signified the closing of the comm channel, and the only sound left in the passenger cabin was the almost unnoticeable humming of the Ezo core. The Sagittarius was one of the 4 ships that would be tasked with the transportation of the cargo Cicerio had acquired, be it crates of weapons, ammunition, or something bigger like APCs or even tanks. The ships like the Sagittarius would be able to transport it easily. If they could carry thousands of tons of unrefined materials from the fringes of known spaces to whatever place they were needed, then they should be able to do the job. Else I should probably look into replacing them. Those 4 ships, the Sagittarius, the Gemini, the Ares, and the Libra, were hopefully more than enough for Cicerio, but they would probably have to make multiple trips. The shipping manifest Cesario showed me listed enough items to fill 4/5 of the loading capacity of the 4 ships, including the proper securing of the cargo, and I wasn't naive enough to believe that the manifest was completely accurate. Cesario was probably holding back information about a good portion of the items he wanted me to transport, and it wouldn't surprise me if the total amount of crates doubled by the end of it. Furthermore, contrary to his promise, he hadn't told me long in advance when the deal would happen, and 2 of the ships I intended to send on this wouldn't have been ready before the end of the month. For that alone, I would take a pound of flesh from him and rework the contract we had agreed on a month ago. I should set up a second contract too, just in case he wouldn't let me specific crates to make sure I didn't transport anything illegal. A simple contract that I wasn't responsible for the content and that he took full legal responsibility. I wasn't an idiot, and I had no interest in taking the fall for him. "Sir, we're close to the Sagittarius." "Thank you," I answered, and prepared myself for the change in gravity that would happen when we entered the hangar bay of the ship. I took more look around the cabin of the shuttle and thought about spending some of the time we traveled in here. The Sagittarius wasn't a ship built with comfort in mind, at least not the kind of comfort I was used to. But I probably wouldn't. Spending some time around the decks of the Sagittarius and talking with the crew members would help me keep my image up, and the people would have a nice story to tell of how they met the big boss and how nice he was. Thankfully, the trip is a short one, I thought with a sigh. October 6th, 2173, 0203. Terracon 5, Icarium System. Warehouse District of Laudurum, Leven Banks. Sneaking into the warehouse was as easy as Luke had said, something that was like a minor miracle in Levin's opinion. The times Luke had been correct in that regard could be counted with one hand, and there would still be fingers left. The opposite had happened far more often, to Levin's chagrin. He had stopped counting after the 30th time. Yet Levin would have preferred if the intrusion into the warehouse had been more difficult than Luke's prognosis, because somewhere down the line, it would come back to bite them in the ass, and that situation would be much worse. "See, I told you it would be easy," said Luke, his voice just a bit louder than a whisper, and Levine did his best to hold back the sigh that wanted to escape his mouth. His once mentor and now friend couldn't help himself and utter these words. And from experience, Levin knew that Luke had just jinxed them. The last time he said those words, they were chased by a pack of guard Varan not 5 minutes later. Hopefully it wouldn't end as bad and humiliating as that time. Trying to come up with an explanation about what happened while a nurse applied Medigel to his buttocks was an experience Levin didn't want to re-experience. One time was more than enough. Luke had noticed his unimpressed stare and made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "Don't look at me like that. How should I have known that he had a pack of Varan patrolling the grounds?" he argued, knowing exactly why Levin gave him that look. This time, I scouted and found all their security measures. And I checked for Varans. Twice. There are none. And you can't hold that incident over my head forever. You know just as well as I that anything connected with Boss Blasco isn't normal. That is something that Levin can't deny. One could wander through the galaxy for 5 decades or more and never meet an individual like Boss Blasco ever again. Since joining Luke in his quest to become rich, he had met the strangest people, seen the most incredible things, and had his worldview shattered more times than he could count. But amongst everything he experienced, meeting Boss Blasco was still and would ever be at the top of the list. After all, how many people could claim that they met a honor crime boss? Furthermore, not just any crime boss, but one deeply fascinated by human crime bosses of the 20th century and acts like them, or at least acts like they're depicted by movies from that time period. Meeting a Hanar in a dimly lit office, sitting behind a desk, and smoking a cigar had been an experience for Levin, and afterward, he could say with pride that he was well on his way to seeing everything the galaxy had to offer. Before, he didn't even know that Hanar were able to smoke. How Boss Blasco rose to his position and how he managed to gain the loyalty of his lieutenants was a mystery shrouded in so many rumors that nobody knew for certain how it happened. Especially since one of his lieutenants was a Krogan. Some say he proved himself by pitting 2 rival gangs against each other and mopping up the survivors. Others claimed he killed 2 Krogans with nothing but his tentacles, and the most outlandish rumors said that he defeated a Thrasher maw on foot or tentacle by himself. Honestly, Levin wouldn't be surprised if those rumors ended up as the script of some movie. They were epic enough for that. Yet Boss Blasco was only one of the incredible personalities Levin met on his travels with Luke. There was this Krogan landlord who headbutted people if they brought too much dirt into his building and threw tenants out through the window if they missed the deadline for rent, the Batarian who was in charge of an animal charter, or the Turian who lived on a dumpster planet, searching for parts for his doomsday laser. The galaxy was a place full of interesting people, and Levin was never not grateful that Luke took him with him, and that's why he stuck with Luke. Even if he got them in situations that had Levin fear for his life, he knew when push comes to shove, he could trust Luke and vice versa. "Come on, don't just stand there," said Luke, waving Levin towards him. "The crates we're looking for should be somewhere over there." Levin followed after Luke, activating the flashlight function of his Omni tool on the lowest setting so that the light couldn't be seen from outside. Not that any light would escape the meters-high crates stacked on both sides of the passage. The atmosphere was eerie, and the only sound was the echo of their almost silent footsteps. Not even the wind howling outside the warehouse could be heard. "Are you sure that everything is going according to plan?" asked Levin, flashing his light in the direction from where they had come. "Yes, everything is going according to plan. Stop being such a worrywart," assured Luke, who walked forward, his own flashlight hushing over the labels of the crates in search of the right one. "The security equipment is displaying a loop for the next hour, and we should be out and gone long before the time runs out." "If you say so," said Levin, not really reassured by Luke's words. "That's the one," exclaimed Luke, his voice excited but not louder than a whisper. He walked towards the crate and put a code breaker next to the electronic lock. The two of them waited for almost 2 minutes, either for the signal that the crate was open or that the alarm of the warehouse was going off. With their track record, both were viable possibilities. Thankfully, it's the former, and the lock opens with a click that echoes through the warehouse. Slowly, as if he was handling a newly hatched Solarian baby, Luke opened the crate and shined inside with his flashlight. "Levin, my dear friend, we hit the jackpot," whispered Luke, awed. And Levin could only nod when he saw what was inside the crate. There had to be at least 24 or more Turian military assault rifles of the last generation. A single one could go for several 10,000 credits easily on the black market, and now they got their hands on several dozen of them. Getting them all out of the warehouse without anyone noticing would be a hassle, but it wouldn't be that much of a problem for them. Smuggling the herd of biotic space cows had been much more difficult. Levin was allowing himself to smirk when he noticed the red point on Luke's back, which was soon followed by a second. His mind not really processing what he was seeing, he turned in the direction from where the red points were coming and saw that he himself had suddenly 3 red points on his chest, and the worst thing was they were moving. Understanding came slowly to him, but when it was there, it hit like a crash-landing space shuttle. He tipped Luke on the shoulder, and his tipping got more frequent when he was ignored. "What?" snapped Luke and turned towards him annoyedly. Instead of answering him, Levin pointed in the direction the red points were coming from. Slowly, like ghosts, they emerged from the dark, their weapons pointed at them, the muzzles not wavering for a moment. "Oh," was Luke's helpful commentary, and he was as frozen as Levin in the face of the very real possibility of death. A snap sounded through the dark, and in the previous silence, it sounded like the detonation of a bomb. The first thought going through Levin's head when the world suddenly turned bright was that the armed people before him had opened fire and that he would die. Thankfully, it was only the lighting of the warehouse. The fact that he almost lost control of his bladder wasn't important in comparison to the sheer relief that flooded him when he noticed that he wasn't dead. But that relief turned to dread quite fast when he noticed who walked through the rows of armed soldiers. After all, there was probably no human alive who wouldn't recognize him. "You know, in a situation like this, it's normal to raise your hands and surrender," drawled Oscar Denebrin. Levin thought that was a piece of good advice. Chapter 33. October 6, 2173, 0221. Turkon 5, Ikirium System, Warehouse District of Ladurum, Levin Banks. It took a moment for Levin to comprehend Oscar Denebrin's words, not because they were complicated or spoken quietly, but because the situation was so out of Levin's comfort zone that his mind needed a few seconds to reboot. Yet when his mind finally processed the words, Levin's arms wanted to shoot up, and he could only thank his subconscious that it managed to stop his knee-jerk reaction. A sudden and fast movement of his arms would have definitely earned him a bullet or two in the head. The people surrounding Denebrin protectively had rifles pointed at Luke and him, and didn't look like the kind of guys who appreciated anything that could become threatening to their charge. Slowly, ever so slowly, Levin raised his arms over his head, with his palms pointing forwards to show that his hands were empty. Glancing to the side, he saw Luke still staring at the newcomers and that he hadn't moved an inch. It was like time did stop moving for him. Levin winced. It wasn't like he couldn't understand why Luke reacted that way. The situation was quite unbelievable. But not following the suggestions of the man in charge of the people with guns was unmistakably the worst decision. Thankfully, Levin stood close enough to his partner to kick his leg. Slowly, of course. It wouldn't do if Levin got shot for his efforts to prevent his partner from making the acquaintance with a bullet. "Oh yes, yes, hands in the air. A wonderful idea," Luke stammered after Levin's kick got him out of his trance, and he proceeded to do just that. It felt like half an eternity, but less than a minute passed until Denebrin broke the silence that had settled between the two groups. "Well, now that we have worked out our respective positions, may I ask what you're doing here? I mean, it's always great to see two members of different species working together, but this isn't exactly the place I would have thought to wander upon it." Levin could feel the lump in his throat when he tried to answer Denebrin's command. And it was a command, no matter how politely he asked. It was like he said, they knew their respective positions, and Denebrin's position was the one that held all the power, most importantly, the one over Luke's and Levin's lives. So not doing as Denebrin asked was the same as playing with volatile fire. After understanding that, was it surprising that Levin found it difficult to speak? Luke hadn't the same reservations as Levin. "Well, you see, sir," began Luke, and while his previous stammer had disappeared, Levin could still notice the nervousness clinging to his voice. "I heard from a guy who has a friend who's acquainted with this guy who heard from a stripper who got this customer." It took less than a minute of Luke's talking for Levin to wish he hadn't kicked Luke out of his state of shock. There was nothing more Levin wanted to do than slap himself in the face. Luke's talking would throw them only deeper into trouble. It always had. Why did he expect that it would be different this time? Thankfully, the light smile on Denebrin's face hadn't turned annoyed. Instead, Levin could see an ounce of amusement that grew more prominent the longer Luke talked. Was it possible? Would Luke's long-ass explanation help them this time? Contrary to everything Levin had experienced until now, Denebrin held up his left hand to politely interrupt Luke and said, "I think I get it now. You got information about this place, and thanks to it going through multiple sources, you didn't know from who you were going to steal. Am I correct?" "Yes, sir, that's correct," squeaked Luke, looking at the guy who stepped closer to him with a rifle still trained on his head. Another nonchalant gesture from Denebrin, and the guy took a step back. If Levin had to take a guess, the soldiers around Denebrin weren't as amused as the man himself, and probably thought Luke was disrespecting their boss with his nonstop talking. There were rumors galore about what employees of Ad Astra did when people disrespected or talked disdainfully about Oscar Denebrin in their presence. Truthfully, most just got into an argument with the offending person. But there were also some that took things too far, most notably those in the Ad Astra Security Division. And Levin wasn't talking about black eyes or broken noses, but extended stays in the hospital. Yet those instances never made it to the public. The victim got compensated, the hospital bills paid, and the person responsible got relocated. If there were a department that dealt solely with such situations, it wouldn't surprise Levin. The stellar reputation Ad Astra sported didn't leave room to expect otherwise. All in all, Levin didn't want to learn if those rumors about the Ad Astra SD were truthful. The guys around Denebrin were definitely part of the SD, and if they put civilians into the hospital for bad-mouthing their boss in public, What would they do to the two guys trying to steal from him? Suddenly, being killed wasn't the worst option anymore. Other options were far more terrifying. At least it seemed like Denebrin had tight control over them and didn't want unnecessary violence. So, continued Denebrin, if you had known who owned these crates, you would have skipped this opportunity? Yes, said Levin before Luke had the chance to answer. If Levin knew him well enough, and he did, then the answer to that question would put them deeper into the hot water than they were already in. Denebrin looked at him and raised an eyebrow in question at the speed Levin had answered with. Slowly, Denebrin turned to look at Luke, who fidgeted under the questioning stare. Probably not, would still do it, escaped Luke quietly. But the silence and openness of the warehouse allowed his voice to echo loudly. Fuck. That was the word that sped through Levin's head. Constantly, repeatedly, nothing but this word filled his mind. You don't tell the most powerful human alive that you would steal from him to his face. You don't do it to anyone. That was probably the first lesson in thieving 101. Sometimes Levin wondered if Luke was suicidal. Solarians had a much shorter lifespan than humans, and Luke may have left a decade to live at best. Yet that was no excuse to drag Levin into a surefire execution for a last blaze of glory. That was it. If they somehow survived, Levin would ditch Luke and do his own thing. Deep down, he knew he wouldn't do it. Levin had thought about it a few times, whenever they got into such a situation, in fact, but hadn't gone through. So why should this time be any different? The guys around them were more like statues than people, disciplined as they were, but Levin could see how they all tensed after they heard Luke's admission. Yet the person their fate hinged on just looked silently at Luke and blinked. He blinked and then blinked once more before he started to laugh. At first it wasn't more than a chuckle before it got progressively louder, until Denebrin laughed loud enough that Levin was sure that people passing the warehouse outside could hear him. While their heads didn't move an inch, the security guys were probably looking at Denebrin with the same incomprehension as Luke and Levin. Levin didn't understand the world anymore. He was sure he would be dead in the next few minutes, but here he was, looking at loudly laughing Oscar Denebrin. Damn, chuckled Denebrin after he calmed down from his laughing fit. It wasn't even that funny, but I couldn't help it. It was probably the most unexpected answer I ever heard, directly to my face, too. He took a step closer to Luke and slowly clapped. You are probably one of the most fearless people I've met. Was that good, or was it not? Levin couldn't decide. His whole body felt as if gravity had increased tenfold. Denebrin took one look at him and said, Oh, relax. I'm not going to kill you. Perhaps dump you at the local police station for breaking and entering. After all, I'm a law-abiding citizen. Levin called bull on that, but could still feel his body relaxing slightly. Denebrin's first two assertions may be veritable, but the last one, that he was a law-abiding citizen, never in his life had Levin heard a more bald-faced lie. If Oscar Denebrin was a law-abiding citizen, then Levin was a Prothean. In his opinion, the only reason Denebrin wasn't facing a jail sentence was that he was too powerful, too important, knew the right people, and could probably bury every shred of evidence of his wrongdoing so deep that not even archaeologists could find them. The man had probably broken more laws than Luke and Levin combined. The difference was that nobody dared to call him out on it. Besides, if Levin broke the law, it was a crime. If Denebrin did it, it was a necessity. It was the simple beauty of the double standard between the average and the upper crust. Besides, continued Denebrin, unknowing of Levin's thoughts, my name wouldn't have shown up in connection to those warehouses. I'm just the guy responsible for the transportation of those goods. And suddenly it felt like a burden just fell off Levin's shoulders. They hadn't tried to rob Oscar Denebrin personally. Well, he was still the guy responsible for transportation, in his own words, but the goods didn't belong to him. To Levin, it felt like their life expectancy rose by a large margin. They belonged to my business partner, Quintinius Cesario, and as suddenly as his spirits had lifted, they plummeted once again. Quintinius Cesario was a name Levin knew well. The Turian may not have the same amount of financial, political, or even social power as Denebrin, but he had by far more connections in the underbelly of galactic society. It may very well be even worse. Instead of being on Denbren's shit list, they would become the two newest additions to Caesario's. With Denbren, the only thing they would have to do if they got out of this situation alive would be to avoid the Alliance territory. He may be a giant in comparison to Luke and Levin, but his influence mostly restricted itself to where humans were the majority. If they lay low somewhere else in the galaxy, they could avoid Denbren's retaliation and continue their work unhindered. That wasn't the case with Caesarea, though. The Turian would put their names out there, and it wouldn't take 2 weeks before there was at least one person in every corner of the galaxy who hadn't heard their name and was on the lookout for them. Nobody would hire them anymore, or buy the goods they acquired out of fear of pissing off Caesario's associates for colluding with them. And nothing was more effective than the possibility of lowering one's position that would stop people from working with them. Levin's concern must have shown on his face because Denbren turned to him, and while his face retained a passive smile, there was a knowing glint in his eyes. "Don't worry," Denbren said, his voice adopting a soothing tone. "As long as we come to an understanding, there will be no need to inform Quintinius of this little incident." The casual use of Caesario's first name spoke of a familiarity between the two that Levin hadn't known. There weren't even rumors about any sign of cooperation between the two. Yet wasn't that an indication that Luke and Levin stumbled upon something that could very well kill them? If they went to such lengths to keep their relationship hidden, Luke's and Levin's deaths would be a small price to pay to keep it so. Of course, it had been Denbren who dropped Caesario's name and told them they were cooperating. But if they had looked a bit deeper into the job after they had left, they would have found out that Caesario owned the items in the warehouse. With Denbren appearing and telling them he was shipping the crates to only God knows where, the logical conclusion they would arrive at would be that the two people were cooperating. Instead, Denbren told them flat out so that he could control their reaction to this revelation. He took away a valuable piece of information from them before they even knew it existed. If Levin weren't so terrified of him at the moment, he would look at Denbren with stars in his eyes for pulling off such a move. Yet there was a flicker of hope, and Levin was willing to grasp it and never let go. He swallowed his anxiety and asked, "You mentioned an understanding, sir. What kind of understanding?" Denbren's smile grew marginally brighter. "If I followed your partners," he nodded at Luke, "explanation correctly, then it seems like you know a lot of people in very different positions. Am I correct?" "You are, sir," agreed Levin as politely as he could. It didn't hurt to be polite, and it definitely didn't hurt his chances of staying alive. "Different positions" is an understatement, threw Luke in, and Levin had to suppress the urge to throttle him. "I know a Batarian stripper, a Hanar crime boss, an Elcor fitness trainer." The kick Levin aimed at Luke thankfully shut him up. He ignored his partner's hurt look aimed at him and added, "As you heard, we really do know some interesting people." "A Hanar crime boss?" Denbren whispered to himself before he shook his head almost unnoticeably. "No matter. It's nice to hear that you got around so much to meet such different people. It seems like you would be perfect for the job I have in mind." "A job," repeated Levin and Luke, and while Levin's voice spoke of curiosity, Luke's was, in comparison, dripping with anticipation. "I take it that you're interested?" That was probably the most rhetorical question Levin had heard this month. The only question more rhetorical would have been, "Do you want to live?" And those two questions were one and the same at the moment. "Of course," declared Luke enthusiastically. "This job is a bust, so we need a new one to pay the bills. And a job from the most powerful human alive is sure to be interesting. And challenging. And I like challenges." There was a slight pause in Luke's torrent of words before he turned a bit sheepish. "And a job from you will mean that we get out of here alive." The exact same thought had gone through Levin's head. If Denbren had a job for them, then they would have to be alive to do it. It was probably their best chance. And who knows, perhaps it would even be lucrative for them. Still, there was one thing nagging on his mind, and deciding to be brave, Levin asked, "What about Mr. Caesario?" "What about Quintinius?" said Denbren dismissively. "As far as I am concerned, nothing has happened that requires his attention. I am sure there are more important uses of his time than him listening to my recounting of a routine inspection." There weren't enough words of gratitude in the galaxy to express Levin's relief. Nonetheless, he directed as many as he knew toward the different deities he knew. That was one less problem he and Luke would have to deal with. "So, about the job," said Luke before the silence between them could get awkward. Denebrin took a look around, held up his right hand, and spun his index finger in a circle. At once, more than 3/4 of the soldiers surrounding them lowered their weapons and disappeared into the darkness. Probably to check if there were more unwelcome guests around. The ease with which the soldiers disappeared got Levin to think. If the ones he knew were there could disappear so well that there were no signs of their presence anymore, how many of Denebrin's escort had stayed in the shadows? The total number could be double the amount of those he had seen. And wasn't that a chilling thought? There could still be muzzles pointed at them, even if the remaining soldiers put their guns down at Denebrin's sign. The fact that they lowered their weapons at all pointed to the accuracy of Levin's guess. Neither Luke nor he were known quantities, and if those guys from the Ad Astra Security Division were as protective of their boss as those rumors said, then they would have never done so, not even at their boss's request. "You can put your hands down now, you know. There's no reason to keep them up anymore," said Denebrin. "Thank the Delatrasses," sighed Luke, relieved, and let his arms fall down. Levin, however, took them down slowly, watching the reactions of the remaining soldiers. They didn't do so much as twitch, lending further credit to his theory that there was someone in the shadows with a gun pointed at them. Yet he put the thoughts about that to the back of his mind. They were of no importance right now. It didn't change the outcome of what was going to happen. They would accept the job anyway. For what else could they do? They could deny it, of course, but that would put them into a situation they didn't want to be in. Either Denebrin killed them now if they refused, or Cesario would sometime in the future. "What are the details of the job?" asked Levin, trying to get the conversation back on track. The faster they got to the point where they could agree to do it, the faster their survival was guaranteed. "It's more a series of jobs, not a single task," explained Denebrin. "It will take a bit longer than just a few weeks." "All right," nodded Levin. Of course, it would take longer. Otherwise, why would he have asked if they were well connected? Else he would have sent one of his employees to get it done. "But don't worry, it won't take that much effort from your side. It's something you can do along the way, so you can still run jobs for other people. And depending on how good you are, I'm willing to pay appropriately. I'm not someone who isn't willing to reward a job well done." Getting paid? Levin would have been content with the assurance that they would keep their lives. Was this Denebrin's way to keep them from running after they agreed to do the job? It was a hell of an incentive as well. Everybody knew that Oscar Denebrin was a man that paid well. Probably better than any other client Luke and Levin had. "So, what do you want us to do?" asked Luke, and Levin could hear a tinge of impatience. He was fired up by the prospective reward. "I'm looking for a slew of items, weapons, armor, etc. Everything you can get your hands on. A single crate of any item should be enough." "That sounds a little too easy for me," said Levin. "There has to be more. Or am I wrong? With your resources, you could easily buy them." "You would be right," hummed Denebrin, "if I wanted the run-of-the-mill items. Furthermore, I don't know anyone who could get me the good stuff from the black market, at least without information spreading around about it." Levin was just about to ask why he thought he could trust them not to spread the information when he saw that Denebrin's smile had gotten an icy edge. He didn't trust them at all. Denebrin just saw an opportunity and took it, trusting his instincts. Besides, if his instincts were wrong, he wouldn't have to lift a finger to deal with them, a single word to Cesario, and they would be in Hell's Kitchen. "We can get you that," agreed Luke, oblivious to Levin's thoughts. "What were you thinking about? Turian, Asari, Krogan, or Elcor? How about all of them? And I don't want just the newest things. If you can get your hands on antiques or older models, it would be great. The gradual improvements will be a great help to my scientists," responded Denebrin.